Jack. This sermon today is based on two books. One that made me angry, and that was the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones, and I'll talk about that in the sermon, at the beginning of the sermon. And the other is a book that made me happy, and it's called A Beginner's Guide to America by Roya Hakakian. Roya Hakakian is an ethnic Armenian who was born and raised in Iran and who almost 40 years ago, as a teenager, immigrated to the United States, I think with her parents. And she's written this book for recent immigrants. This is a brand new book, just came out a year or two ago. And of course, it's not really a book for immigrants from countries like England or France. It's a book for immigrants from countries that are very different than the United States. But there are a great many such countries in the Middle East and East Asia and South Asia and Africa and South America and Central America. So I want to read you just a few excerpts from this book. From the moment you step off the plane, your eyes will search for the traces of Americanness in your surroundings. Yet, the sun is the same sun. The asphalt looks just as black. The jetway is like all the other jetways. Only when you stand in line, one hand clutching a bag, and your eyes begin to rove about, will you see something you have only seen at a tourist destination before. Pinned on the chest pocket of the officers guiding everyone are name tags: Sanchez, McWilliams, Cho, Alhamid, and by God, all of them Americans. If jet lag has not clouded your senses, you will instantly recognize this to be the surest sign of America. In the monochrome life you have just left behind, such a motley human landscape would have been unthinkable. Now she's standing in line to be interviewed by customs agents. And the people who check passports and things. Sweat beads on your temples. Nothing good ever came of a uniform where you used to live. Uniforms belonged to the powerful. They were the people you had to outfox. Here you must do your best to remember that the officers in the booths have little in common with the ones you used to fear. Take a deep breath and remind yourself that you are in a place where the law, for the most part, is king. America cares little about what you have done in your home country, only what you will do while you are here. You will feel that your heritage is being tossed aside, but in America, they will not take away your books or examine the writings in your journals. If you come from a land where women must don the veil, you will be stunned to see women without veils walking about. You'll be even more stunned to see a few women with veils passing them by, each paying no mind to the other. The two kinds of women you thought could never mix are milling about before your very eyes. This is another American miracle, not only of harmony among ethnicities, but also beliefs. If you yourself donned the veil, not by personal choice, but by religious order, Here is your chance to peel it away. Give your head a good shake and let the wind blow through your hair. What will be even more wondrous than your bare head is that no one will stare at you. And unlike what the clerics had always warned, no men will be driven wild. Democracy at the voting booth boils down to the ballot. But on the street, as you see them on that first day, democracy manifests as indifference. The novelty you are experiencing today is just that. No one watches or cares much about what you do, as long as you don't harm anyone. That's the end of the reading.
We'll now have a meditation, followed by some moments of silence. With the grievous horrors of war that have been unleashed upon the world, it seems right that we take a moment in our worship to cast upon the waters of action some words of healing and hope. Spirit of life, in this horrible time of war, we would have peace. The Middle East situation is so convoluted, a permanent solution may seem out of reach altogether. But people made the decisions that have led to today, and people can make different ones. May the hearts of the Arabs and Jews be softened so that they can see the humanness in each other's visages and be moved to forsake the explosive weapons of destruction for a trial of compassion, forbearance, and generosity. These will surely lead to a more salutary outcome than more months, years, even decades of hostility and mistrust. And may we here in our nation, by showing love and caring for people on both sides of the conflict, help bring about the day when everyone shall sit beneath their vine and fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. And likewise, in the Ukraine, may wiser heads prevail among the Russian aggressors, that the terrible loss of life be brought to an end, and amity once again rule in the region. So may it be. Amen.
Sound is muted again.
You muted yourself, Matt.
I keep doing this. Sorry. Let me start this over again.
Please.
It's always something.
You cut the sound out.
I couldn't hear that comment.
Keep cutting the sound out.
That wasn't me. I don't know what's going on here. technical stuff. We
Let-
rely on these
Let me
things.
share mine, Richard.
Let me just stop this share and start it over again. Now that I'm not muted. Okay, well, start the share first, and then we'll see what happens. Share. Here, here, here.
Four years ago, in November of 2019, an entire issue of the New York Times Sunday magazine was devoted to something called the 1619 Project, written in part and organized by Nicole Hannah Jones. These are the opening words of the 1619 Project. Since then, by the way, it's appeared as a book and also, I think, as a series of documentaries. But here's the original beginning of the 1619 Project. In August of 1619, a ship appeared on the horizon near a coastal port in the English colony of Virginia. It carried more than 20 enslaved Africans who were sold to the colonists. No aspect of the country that would be formed here has been untouched by the years of slavery that followed. On the 400th anniversary of this fateful moment, it is finally time to tell our story truthfully. Our democracy's founding ideals were false when they were written. I want to push back on this a little. There's no acknowledgement here. Well, first of all, there's no America in 1619, right? We're talking the British Empire here. Virginia is part of the British Empire. There's no acknowledgement that slavery then was a worldwide phenomenon. Yes, there was slavery in the British Empire, and there was slavery in the Spanish Empire, and in a number of African empires, and in the Ottoman Empire, and the Chinese Empire, and the Inca Empire here in the Western Hemisphere, and lots of other. It was a worldwide phenomenon. And it wasn't just a worldwide phenomenon, it's a phenomenon that had been in existence as long as anybody could remember. Slavery was immemorial. It was an immemorial phenomenon. And it was just taken for granted by everyone as a part of life, like the way the sky is blue. The Jewish Bible, which Christians call the Old Testament, takes slavery for granted. There's no condemnation of slavery anywhere in the Jewish Bible. The Christian New Testament takes slavery for granted. It urges masters to treat slaves decently, and it urges slaves to obey their masters, but it never condemns slavery. It just takes it for granted. Jesus took slavery for granted. Nicole Hannah-Jones said our democracy's founding ideals were false when they were written. They weren't false. Ideals are not false, they're aspirations. Our founding ideals were aspirations, and they led directly to the end of slavery. There was a continuous series of events, beginning with the Declaration of Independence and leading to the complete abolition of slavery in the US in 1865 at the end of the Civil War. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were friends. They agreed in 1776 that there should be some kind of formal declaration of independence from Britain. They had very similar ideas about what this declaration should contain. John said to Tom, you do it, you write it. Adams knew, I think, that Tom Jefferson was a better writer than Adams was. I think Adams was very aware that Tom was a Southerner. He was from Virginia, which would make it much more likely that the Southern colonies would join in the Declaration. And I think, I gather that John was kind of pompous. He wasn't really all that popular, but he knew that. And he knew that Jefferson was. He was young and good looking and gregarious. And so John Adams said to Tom Jefferson, Tom, you do it. And Jefferson did. And the result was the Declaration of Independence. But only 4 years later, John Adams wrote the new Massachusetts Constitution. This was in 1780. The Declaration of Independence doesn't have the force of law, right? It's an inspirational document. The Massachusetts Constitution does have the force of law. And the Massachusetts Constitution begins with the Declaration of Rights, which says all of the things that the Declaration of Independence said by way of human rights, but it was the law. And it, within a couple of years, some slaves in Massachusetts sued, claiming that their enslaved status was unconstitutional. And the Supreme Judicial Court, which was one of the models for the US Supreme Court, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, which had been created in this Constitution, agreed. They said, yes, slavery is unconstitutional. And so as of 1783, there was no slavery in Massachusetts. And a number of northern states abolished slavery at about the same time. Pennsylvania had already abolished it in 1780 because Pennsylvania was controlled by Quakers, and Quakers had condemned slavery 100 years earlier when they were first formed in England. New Hampshire abolished slavery the same year as Massachusetts, 1783. Connecticut and Rhode Island followed in 1784. Vermont, which was not one of the 13 colonies, when it joined the Union in 1791, it joined as a free state. Vermont had actually abolished slavery in 1777, while it was an independent republic. The British Empire abolished the slave trade, the transatlantic trade in slaves, in 1807. And the US followed the same year. It went into effect January 1st, 1808, but the US Congress abolished the slave trade at the same time. The British Empire abolished slavery throughout the empire. This is not the slave trade now, this is slavery itself in 1833. And I think they were pioneers. They were the first of these empires to do so, to end slavery. In the US, it was more complicated. It took till 1865, but if you took the kind of history course I did in high school, you learned about all this decades-long struggle in the US over ending slavery. All these things like the compromises where one new state would be admitted to the Union as a slave state if another was admitted as a free state, and so on. This kind of stuff went on for a long time. Finally, of course, erupting in the Civil War in 1861. In the Civil War, I think for the first time in the history of the world, one ethnic group went to war to liberate another ethnic group. I don't think that had ever happened before. And in that war, of course, some free blacks fighting on the North were killed, thousands of them. But the point to me is that 400,000 white people in the North died to liberate African Americans from slavery. 400,000 white people died to end slavery. People today talk about, we want reparations. Well, my goodness, isn't 400,000 dead people a beginning of reparations? In 1865, a Frenchman named Edouard de la Boulaye, he was a French abolitionist. France had succeeded in eliminating slavery in 1848. But 17 years later, Edouard de la Boulaye, elated that the United States had finally eliminated slavery with the end of the Civil War, proposed that France give a statue to the United States, a Statue of Liberty, to celebrate America's abolition of slavery. The word liberty in the Statue of Liberty means the liberation of the slaves. That's what it was originally about. That's the original concept. We hardly ever see the feet of the Statue of Liberty, but if you just Google feet of the Statue of Liberty, you can see some pictures. And the statue, she's walking. Her left foot is forward and planted firmly on the ground. Her right foot is kind of half off the ground. And at her feet are broken shackles, broken chains. And in her left arm, there's a tablet on which it says July IV MDCCLXXVI, that is July 4th, 1776. The statue is physically linking the Declaration of Independence in her left hand to the freedom of the slaves indicated by the shackles, the broken shackles at her feet. Unfortunately, this understanding of the statue has been obscured. Originally, the proposal of this man was that France would make the statue, give it to the US in time for our nation's centennial in 1876, the centennial of the Declaration of Independence. But there was a delay. The US had to come up with the money and then erect the pedestal, and that took another 10 years. And sometime in there, the connection with slavery was diluted in the understanding of the Americans involved. And this poem you've all heard by Emma Lazarus was attached to the pedestal. The Emma Lazarus poem says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." And ever since, we've thought of the statue as something specifically oriented toward welcoming immigrants, but that's not what it was about. It was about celebrating the liberation of the slaves. I would say to Nicole Hannah-Jones, no, our principles were not false. They were aspirations that we worked continuously to realize. And the strength of America is that we have these principles and we continue to work to realize them. I'd like to take a few minutes to end on a more positive note, and also to, well, because this book makes me happy, to read a few more excerpts from this book, A Beginner's Guide to America. These are the strengths of America as seen by a newcomer. Back to your first day in America, the relatively clean sidewalks might escape you on that first day, but if you do notice them, they'll make you pause. There'll be a breeze, yet little trash to swirl along the ground. In time, you'll wonder about the cleanliness of the streets and the reasons why your old streets were strewn with litter and these streets are not. As your taxi pulls away from the curb, either your driver or an incessant beeping will force you to put on your seatbelt. You think this is ridiculous. You already feel safer than you've ever felt in your life, but you put on the seatbelt because it is the law, as helmets are for cyclists. These safety measures make you realize better than any seal or stamp in your passport that you have officially moved into a territory where human life is not as cheap as you once knew. Driving down the highway in the taxi, you see a lot of signs. Most of them you've seen before: yield, pedestrian crossing, slow down. Others you have not. This portion of the highway was adopted by. You ask your driver what the sign says. When he explains the meaning, you realize that a swath of asphalt here is looked after better than some of the living things in your former homeland. If you are a refugee, and not simply an immigrant, but a refugee, you may find that the local church has furnished your apartment, covered your beds with sheets, or hung towels on the bathroom racks. Or the synagogue has lined up tutors for your children. Or the mosque has stocked your refrigerator, and you wonder why, because you might not be a Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim. But those who furnished your home did not care about your religion, only that you were new in town. You see two men, arms looped in each other's arms, hands tucked in each other's back pockets, walking down the street, and you get scared. In your former country, you knew two kinds of gay men. There were gay men among the powerful, whom everyone knew were gay, but dared not call them so. And then there were ordinary gay men who were harassed and treated violently not just by the authorities, but by average citizens. That's why seeing the two men walking together scares you. And then you remember that you are here in a land where whatever you wish to do goes, as long as you do not harm anyone. She talks about hobbies that Americans have, and she talks about how incredulous she was that people would spend time bird watching. She thought it was ridiculous. And then she said, and she asked herself, how is all this possible? And she said, I finally realized that in the lives of those who no longer have to stand in line for basic daily staples, large swaths of time and space open up to be filled with other activities. Back in school, in your home country, you had fat textbooks and you practiced endlessly for tests. But you rarely had access to any outside reading that the Ministry of Education had not approved. School did not aim to make a reader out of you, but a memorizer. That is why your schools had no libraries. Say you are a medical doctor in training, and you're in a meeting discussing a very sick patient. The doctor in charge gives you an overview of the case, then turns to you and asks your opinion. What do you think is the best course of treatment now? The doctor asks you. A thunderbolt might as well have struck you. You are suddenly in a world where your opinion is sought. Your kids come home from school less exhausted than back in the former country and without a headache because there is less noise in the classroom, and the classroom is significantly smaller than those they attended in the past. They are also less listless at the end of the day because they had a meal at school. It will be years before you learn of the shortcomings of the American education system. But for now, it's one grand miracle unraveling in stages. First, you learned that the school was free. Then, that the school bused your children for free. And finally, that there was a daily lunch for free. Last excerpt. You might be walking into the post office absent-mindedly one day when someone will hold the door and stand aside to let you pass through. The gesture will stun you because you cannot remember the last time a perfect stranger smiled and held the door for you. Your country rarely extended themselves to random others, especially not in government buildings where everyone was girding himself for the unpleasant encounter that was certain to come with the glum bureaucrat behind the gray counter. Many doors simply shut in your face when people ahead of you rushed in, paying no heed of who was behind. Why all the kindness? It will take years before you understand that here, helping is not something one only does for one's family. Americans do not help because you're one of them. They help because that is what they do. Through volunteerism and performance of civic duties, they honor their country. What binds you with these volunteers who found furniture for you is not the sameness of your skin color or your book of worship or your bloodline. It is the sameness of the cherished American ground you now share with them. For all these acts, Americans have a single name: service. Serving others is to an American what celebrating the leader was to your former countrymen. It is an act of patriotism. It is not through the practice of religious or ethnic ritual or the worship of a person, but through helping fellow citizens that Americans come together to care for their country. It is through service that this jumble of disparate people join together as one nation. Thank you.